Ladies and gentlemen, by the end of it, it was man versus mountain. India moved a mountain, quite literally, to rescue 41 men from inside a tunnel. It took 400 hours, it took men, it took machines, it took a billion prayers, yours and mine. By this time last evening, the workers were out. A nation had erupted into celebration. We celebrated yesterday. But today, as these rescued men flew off in a Chinook helicopter to Dehradun, there are questions in the air we simply cannot ignore. If we ignore them, we ignore them at our own risk. Why was a tunnel that is supposed to save us from landslides become victim to it? Were environment rules deliberately circumvented for the 900-kilometer Char Dham project? When experts in the Supreme Court had warned of the impending Himalayan blunder, why was it ignored? Today, we ask those questions. But before that, let's listen to the men who went through hell for 17 days and lived to tell the tale. Listening to them was the Prime Minister and the entire nation.
अच्छा व्यवहार किया सर, और हमारे माननीय मुख्यमंत्री धामी साहब हमसे बराबर कांटेक्ट करते थे सर, उनका भी बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया अदा करेंगे सर। वो हम लोग का बराबर हालचाल लेते थे सर, फोन करते थे। और आज भी जब हम लोग टनल से बाहर निकले तो धामी साहब ने हम लोग को गले लगाया, और बीके साहब भी थे सर, उन्होंने भी हम लोग को तहे दिल से शुक्रिया अदा किया और हम लोग को गले लगाया सर।
हाँ, इस बार तो बीके सिंह भी पूरा समय वहाँ रहे और डिसिप्लिन, जैसे उनकी जो सोल्जर वाली ट्रेनिंग है ना, वो पूरी ट्रेनिंग इस बार उन्होंने दिखाई।
जी सर, जी सर।
लेकिन मैंने सुना कि मैं तो कोई योगा भी जानता था, तो योगा वगैरह भी करते थे।
जी सर, वही मॉर्निंग में सर योगा वगैरह सिखाता था सर हम लोग का करना। अंदर में तो कुछ खाने पीने के अलावा और तो कुछ काम है नहीं सर। तो मॉर्निंग में हम लोग मॉर्निंग वॉक करते थे और योगा कुछ करते थे कि आदमी का सेहत बना रहे।
आपके साथ और कौन है जो बात करेंगे?
मेरे साथ है सर गब्बर सिंह नेगी सर, टनल फोरमैन है सर।
हाँ, गब्बर सिंह नमस्ते।
सर जय हिंद, राम राम, नमस्कार सर।
नमस्कार नमस्कार गब्बर सिंह, जय हिंद। देखो गब्बर सिंह, मैं तुम्हें तो विशेष रूप से बधाई देता हूँ, क्योंकि मुझे डेली रिपोर्ट हमारे मुख्यमंत्री जी बताते थे कि आप दोनों ने जो लीडरशिप दी और जो टीम स्पिरिट दिखाया, मुझे तो लगता है शायद कभी किसी यूनिवर्सिटी को एक केस स्टडी तैयार करना पड़ेगा कि गब्बर सिंह नेगी गांव का व्यक्ति, उसमें वो कौन सी लीडरशिप क्वालिटी है कि इससे संकट के समय में भी अपनी पूरी टीम को संभाला। और आप तो लोकल होने के कारण आप बहुत आसानी से चीज़ें समझा भी पा रहे थे। तो मैं आपकी तरफ से सुनना चाहूँगा गब्बर।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर, थैंक यू सर आप लोगों का। सर ये सब आप लोगों का आशीर्वाद था सर, आप लोगों ने हमारा हौसला बढ़ाया सर। हमारे माननीय मुख्यमंत्री पुष्कर सिंह धामी साहब हमसे बार बार बात करते थे सर, वो हमसे हमारे कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में बराबर बने रहते थे सर। और हमारी कंपनी की पूरी कंपनी की टीम लगी हुई थी सर। ये कंपनी हमारी फैमिली की जैसी थी सर। कंपनी की तरफ से भी सर कोई कमी नहीं हुई सर हमारे, उन्होंने किसी तरह कोई कसर नहीं छोड़ी, दिन रात एक किया सर। हमारी सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट भी सर हमारे साथ में रही, उनके सारे कर्मचारी एकदम दिल से लगे रहे सर हमारे साथ में। हमारी स्टेट गवर्नमेंट भी हमारे साथ में पूरी बराबर बनी रही सर। हमारी NDRF की टीम, SDRF की टीम, उन्होंने बराबर हमारा हौसला बढ़ा के रखा सर। वो लोग तत्पर डे नाइट एक किया सर, दिन रात उन्होंने मेहनत की सर और हमारा हाल चाल लेते रहे सर। इसलिए हमारा मतलब आप जैसे हमारे देश के प्रधानमंत्री रहे सर, आप जो है जब बाहर से हमारे देश के कंट्री अदर कंट्री से आप लोग खींच के इंसान को बचा के ला सकते सर, तो हम तो सर अपने घर में थे, इसलिए हमें कोई दिक्कत नहीं सर। यहाँ पे हमारे भगवान मतलब भोगनाथ बाबा जी है सर, उनके ऊपर भी सर हमें बहुत विश्वास था और उनकी कृपा भी हमारे पास और हमारे सारे दोस्तों के ऊपर बनी रही सर। और ये दोस्तों का भी बहुत बहुत मैं शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहता हूँ सर, जिन्होंने कि इस मुश्किल की घड़ी में सर एकदम आराम से रहे और हमारी हर बात सुनी है, जैसे हमने कहा उन्होंने सुना सर और हमारे बताए हुए रास्ते पे चले सर। और उन्होंने हौसला नहीं छोड़ा, हमारे साथ में रहे सर और बराबर हमारा बहुत हौसला बढ़ा के रखा सर। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर, मैं ज्यादा क्या कहूँ सर। जय हिंद, जय भारत, जय उत्तराखंड।
आपने बहुत संभाला, लेकिन मैं सबसे एक और बात भी कहना चाहूँगा। आपको शायद अंदाज नहीं होगा, आपके परिवार के सब लोग बहुत दुखी थे स्वाभाविक थी, पूरा देश 140 करोड़ देश के लोगों को चिंता थी और सुबह शाम जो भी मिलता था तो मुझे यही पूछता था कि मोदी जी क्या खबर है, ये कब निकलेंगे, क्या होगा। सामान्य नागरिक भी मेरे से ये सवाल पहले पूछता था। और लेकिन मैंने देखा कि आपके सब परिवारजनों ने, सामान्य रूप से मैंने देखा है कि जब भी ऐसे संकट आता है तो परिवार के लोग बहुत ही गुस्सा करते हैं, परिवार के लोग बहुत ही, और चिंता और बढ़ जाती है। तो आपके परिवार के जन भी सचमुच में बधाई के पात्र हैं कि उन्होंने सचमुच में संयम बरता और इस सारी प्रोसेस को सहयोग किया उन्होंने।
Okay. In the last few days, the man who gave the maximum sound bites to the media on site was tunneling expert Arnold Dix. He had joined the mission in the last leg. Today, when Times Network caught up with him, he was in a hurry to get to the temple because he had promised to go thank the Lord once this rescue operation was over. Take a look at what happened.
Many congratulations, and you did a great job.
We all did a great job. It was a fantastic team. I really must go to the temple, please.
Now you are going back. What are the memories from India?
Sorry?
What are the memories from India?
It's fantastic.
Sir, one second. Just this.
Namaste.
What are the memories from India?
It's just fantastic. My experience here is one of love and looking after human beings and everyone coming together to achieve the impossible.
Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday was a day of celebration, but today is a day of questions and introspection. What and who put the lives of these 41 workers at risk? Was development made priority by deliberately ignoring environment risks? I'll let you make up your mind. Just look at some facts. The Silkyara tunnel collapsed is part of a mega network of roads that crisscross the Himalayas, making its most revered shrines accessible throughout the year. Essentially, what is being built in Uttarakhand is 900 kilometers of all-weather roads called the Char Dham Mahamarg. It connects the Char Dhams, the 4 holiest places in India, which is Gangotri, Yamunotri, Badrinath and Kedarnath. Now, anyone who lives in the hills will tell you that all-weather roads are a boon in the mountains. On paper, the Char Dham project is ambitious and pragmatic. But in reality, it is turning out to be one fraught with dangers. And that is exactly what it should not be. Given that our national security too is at risk, at least that is what the Supreme Court has been told by the centre. Now, consider the ecological context. We are meddling with the Himalayas, the youngest and therefore the most unstable mountain ranges on our planet. Little surprise then, 50% of the mountain state of Uttarakhand is prone to landslides, including Uttarkashi, where the tunnel collapsed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very well-known fact. Were the powers that be not aware of it? Of course they were. They were told. The Supreme Court was told. But the risks were ignored. Why? We'll talk about that in just a bit. Meanwhile, the government in the aftermath of the Silkyara tunnel collapse is discussing the audits of all 29 under-construction tunnels across India, which is great. But why were rules bent in the first place? Consider this. In India, any proposed highway running longer than 100 kilometers needs an environmental clearance. Now, given that the Char Dham Marg is 900 kilometers, the project obviously needed one. But in a rush to finish these projects, the government split this 900-kilometer road network into 53 separate sections. And none of them was over 100 kilometers in length. This is how the need for an environmental impact assessment was evaded. And look at where it landed us. 17 days of pure hell. Despite warnings from citizen groups and geologists in the Supreme Court and in the National Green Tribunal, the sidestepping of environmental clearances went unchallenged. Legal battles, in fact, had even extended to the width of the roads for the Char Dham project. The government said it cannot compromise with 10-meter wide roads, given that China is a real and present danger across Uttarakhand's border. The need for military mobility in the region cannot be compromised, they said. Experts cautioned against such widening in the delicate Himalayan terrain. But the Supreme Court eventually allowed the construction of these 10-meter wide all-weather roads, 900 kilometers of it. Food for thought, the Silkyara tunnel that collapsed is 13 meters wide. And therefore the question, is the Char Dham project turning out to be a highway to hell? That is what I'm asking my guest this evening. Vimlendu Jha is an environmentalist. He's joining us on the broadcast. Naveen Bhatnagar is a former DIG of the NDRF with us on the broadcast as well. Professor Rajiv Sinha is from the Department of Earth Sciences at IIT Kanpur, joins us on the broadcast. And we have Sandeep Chhachra, who's from ActionAid India. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us on the broadcast. Can I just start with Vimlendu Jha? Vimlendu, we spoke about this yesterday. When the workers were being pulled out, I said, right now is a time for celebration. Tomorrow is when we introspect and ask those questions. And we are asking those very important questions today. I want to ask you about what we choose. You know, the government can very well argue that you have put these facts in place. What does it mean? Does it mean that we don't build roads in the Himalayas? Does it mean that the state of Uttarakhand doesn't deserve all-weather roads? What about accessibility? What about accessibility for children to get to school? What about accessibility for pregnant women to get to hospital? What about military accessibility when there is China waiting for us across the border?
So Shreya, I'm so glad that you're actually doing a show today. In fact, I was slightly agitated last evening when the entire country was only talking about glossing over the rescue operations, but not wanting to get into why that disaster really happened in the first place. Any responsible democracy would actually ask those critical questions. And we asked those questions when a bridge collapsed in Gujarat, or for that matter, when there was an Upahar cinema tragedy. We're not just looking at the rescue workers and celebrating their might, but also look at the bending of laws and everything else. Here, your question, indeed, Uttarakhand needs development. Indeed, Uttarakhand and the remote areas of Uttarakhand needs mobility. The citizens also have a right to a road. But right to a road and right to a 13-meter road that we're talking about, and in a geologically sensitive area, without taking into consideration the geology, the geography, the ecology of the region, is nothing but actually creating more disaster. So you're actually not creating a road, you're actually giving a sense, a temporary sense of a road and mobility and development. In long term, you're only devastating and plundering the Himalayas. And that's exactly what has happened. By the way, this project conceived in 2016, 2019 is when this was challenged in the Supreme Court. And in last 1 year, we've actually seen one landslide happening every day in that region, and dozens of people have actually died. So you build a tunnel because on paper it looks great, but if that tunnel cannot survive, then what's the point? So the idea is that, we all want better road, but the carrying capacity of Himalayas, if you don't take that into consideration, it is a failed, it's actually an unscientific project, an unsustainable project. So sustainability, not just in terms of looking at saving our environment, but sustainability also in terms of longevity of this project. So in this case, of course, in the name of national security, the new Forest Act says that till 100 kilometers from the border, no forest clearance permission is required, which primarily means that the entire Uttarakhand, forests will actually be compromised. By the way, one data that was missing, or in the sense it wasn't in your presentation, 600 hectares of forest land has been diverted for this project, which almost means 56,000 trees that's been officially chopped, and I'm not even counting the number of trees, or several hundreds and thousands of trees that we have lost because of the landslide. So loss of loss to people and loss of lives, but also loss to ecology. Imagine tomorrow we're talking, there's something called COP28, we'll be talking about climate change. There's a report that came this morning that talks about India has had one weather event each day in last 9 months. So, and where are those weather events happening? When we have those data points that there is climate change, there is climate vulnerability, there are weather events, and weather events in the Himalayas itself in just last 12 months that you and I have discussed, from Joshimath to Sikkim to Himachal to Uttarakhand, flash floods, then you need to be sensitive towards that. In your arrogance to build something, are you building something or destroying something? This road will not survive. And by the way, there's also Char Dham road project, rail project, which is equally disastrous. Blasting, any geologist and scientist will tell you that if the soil and the rock formation and the plates and everything else can't carry this kind of a load, why build something like that? Have a narrower road or have a more thought through road.
Okay, Naveen Bhatnagar, as former DIG of the NDRF, please help me understand why are we going through this project in the shape and the form that it currently exists in. The fact is that the tunnel collapse in Uttarkashi is a canary in the mines. It is warning us of the dangers ahead. Is it time for us to pause the project, say, let's take a good hard look at it and see if we can do things differently? I'm not saying stop building roads in Uttarakhand. Of course, Uttarakhand needs roads. It'll be great if all the Char Dhams, which are perhaps the biggest employers in the state of Uttarakhand, if all of them are accessible through the year, because that means tourists come through the year, which means people in Uttarakhand have employment through the year. They have money through the year. I'm not saying don't build roads. But the question is, at what cost? We were lucky we could pull out the 41 alive. Who knows what happens next time? Because there is not just one tunnel, there's a second tunnel on the Char Dham project as well.
Yeah. So it's not my subject, but anyhow, I can, from the point of view of NDRF, I can say that it's a great challenge for us and a lesson. In future, if anything goes wrong, comes a situation like that, we should require the other instruments also, because we don't know. These you can say, the area is of disaster-prone area. Earthquake, too much earthquake are coming time and again. And the sandstones are there. This is not a hard rock, it's a sand rock. So naturally, a lot of challenges are there. So we are ready to face the music like that. And we should prepare ourselves with the latest equipments and also the techniques. Now we got this thing capacity, and we know that in such cases how we can do it and how we can rescue the people.
No, Mr. Bhatnagar,
technology and all this.
The point is, while we look at the project itself, Mr. Bhatnagar, it's a lesson for the NDRF and all rescue agencies. And while we look at the project itself, there were basic SOPs also that were not followed. For example, there was no escape tunnel. I mean, you are building a tunnel. You're building a tunnel in a mountain. There has to be a escape tunnel. This is the SOP across the world. Just a minute, Mr. Bhatnagar. This is the SOP across the world. There was no escape tunnel. Forget that. You should be ready for any contingency given the ecology where you're operating. All our heavy-duty machines had to be got to the site because none were available on the ground. So there are, of course, important lessons that have been learned. But Professor Rajiv Sinha, as someone who looks at earth sciences closely, is the government of India willfully committing what essentially can end up being criminal and nothing else?
That's a difficult question. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. See, one has to understand that this debate between environment and development is a long debate. We can keep on talking about it. But there are certain issues which you have already pointed out. They are a fact. One, that we are talking about the most active mountain belt in the world, Himalaya. They are very active, and the landslides and earthquakes are very frequent and common here. And therefore, there is absolutely no denying to the fact that the standard protocols for development or any other infrastructure project has to be followed. There is absolutely no denying to the fact. And but then having said that, it is not just a part of the Himalaya. The entire Himalaya is like that, and therefore, if you stop every project which is going on, then there will be no development in the whole region at all. So there is a debate which has to be done very, very carefully. But then, given the technological advancement, and given the science, in terms of geological knowledge of that region, we are definitely way, way ahead. So the question therefore is that where are we lacking? It is definitely not the technological know-how where we lack. There are similar projects which have happened and which have been done in many, many parts of the world. I have traveled, very widely across the world in much more difficult areas where we have seen such kind of projects very beautifully done and so on. So the lack, so I think what we need to do and understand, where is the lacuna here? Where is the gap here? The gap is between the knowledge and its implementation on ground. Okay, so therefore, if you can make a very nice scientific plan of any of these projects, but then if you don't implement it properly on the ground, for example, you mentioned example of that is escape tunnel. Now, escape tunnel is always a part of the of the such kind of tunneling projects, and I understand that even in this project, it is a part of the plan. But then the question is, why was it not made? So argument again is coming that it is supposed to be made later. No, it is not. It is supposed to be made in parallel. So it is not just meant for the future future tragedies or future accidents which might happen in the tunnel project. It is also supposed to be meant for saving while the project is on. So therefore, I think it is a matter of debate. It is certainly a matter of discussion, and I'm sure some heads should roll that where was the gap, in terms of implementation of these strategies.
But Professor Sinha, while we talk of the gaps and while we talk of the implementation, look at what happened in the Supreme Court. In the Supreme Court, there is a panel headed by an environmentalist who is flagging off exactly what happened on the day of Diwali. This was predicted. He said, if we go ahead, it's going to be dangerous.
Yes, I mean,
we are talking about lacunas and gaps at this point of time. Why was the entire process of getting environmental clearances circumvented? I mean, this is a 900-kilometer road. All of us know it. अब बच्चों को भी पढ़ाया जाता है स्कूल में. A 900-kilometer road means you need an environment clearance, because under Indian law, for every 100 kilometers, you require an environment clearance. क्यों नहीं लिया गया? Because the project was divided into 53 parts.
Yes.
Because everyone was in a hurry
I agree
to build
with
the
you.
roads.
I mean, these are issues, these are questions which have to be asked now and how this happened. But then the other important part which I have been hearing, in these projects, there has to be a continuous and very active involvement of the geologists, because without having a very active involvement of a geologist, it's very difficult to undertake these projects. It is not enough to simply take the advice of a geologist or environmentalist, right in the beginning of the project, but also during the execution of the project. As the project goes on, a continuous monitoring the project by the experts is also critical. So I think, rather than dissecting what has happened, it is very important for us at this moment to understand the lessons and also don't make these mistakes. I think I totally agree that this project, the implementation strategies, everything should be revised, should be looked at a bit more carefully. This accident, fortunately, we are really fortunate, and I must appreciate the NDRF and other team to have done the rescue operation so beautifully. We are lucky that we did not lose a single life in this whole operation. Similar thing happened, for example, a few months ago in Joshimath as well, where again we did not lose any lives. But then we need to start learning from these accidents and also make sure that these mistakes do not happen. We have to, if you want to create a world-class infrastructure in this country, we also have to follow the world-class standards, of of mitigation, of risk mitigation, and also the quality control and everything else. So everything has to be world class. We cannot expect the world class
Shortcut nahi
infrastructure
chalega.
to be developed here without following those protocols and standards. That's very, very sure about that.
Essentially, what you're saying is shortcut nahi chalega. Sandeep
Yes.
Chachra, is it your sense that this was shortcut? That the lives of workers was put at risk despite knowing what could happen?
Common axiom in life, and thank you for having me here, a common axiom in life and health is prevention is better than cure. You know, better safe than sorry. We seem to have forgotten that. But also, as a society, Shreya ji, we seem to not be valuing the lives of our workers, particularly the life conditions, working conditions, the safety, and the futures of our informal workers. The large majority of people who are actually digging those tunnels and making our futures happen, I want to talk from that aspect, are largely what's called migrant informal workers. And you saw those, and I salute their spirit and their work that they made, not just as the workers inside, but also the rescue. But having said it, we don't seem to be valuing, and that's the big lesson that is coming out of it. You've said everything almost. You see, we have very clear idea of how what lapses led to tunnel collapse, but also what short shifting of workers' rights, occupational safety standards was done. I mean, you mentioned about escape tunnels or escape paths. There were also no hume pipes. There were also not clear SOPs for the scenario of collapses. And as you said, the Supreme Court committee had already alerted us of the danger, but we seem to have ignored it. The larger question for the bulk of the informal workers of our country is the question not just of social security, not just of wages, but also of the working conditions and the safety and occupational health standards. Now, as a country, in 2020, we developed the code for workers' safety, health, and the working conditions. This is 2020. But yet again, if I may remind us that it doesn't meet the ground or implementation because we do not have rules framed in several states of the country. And even rule making is in the infancy in several others. Now, having said that, this kind of code tells us that every state and nationally, safety advisory committees have to be set up, which are responsible for workers' safety, occupational health, and working condition standards. We don't have them as yet. And now this particular code, for instance, also advises us what kind of safety committees have to be set up in each unit, what kind of safety officers have to be appointed. We haven't done that. So a very strict monitoring, accountability is needed on that.
Clearly, no one was monitoring.
Yeah, absolutely nothing, because you saw what happened.
In this case, clearly no one was monitoring. I mean, there's supposed to be a escape passage. Where was the escape passage? If it wasn't there, why was no one monitoring? Were we unaware that something like this could happen? If we were aware, then where were the machines to pull us out of the problem? They weren't anywhere inside. They had to be flown in from Indore and other parts of the country. The fact is that as far as monitoring is concerned, there was no monitoring. As far as environmental clearances were concerned, there were no environmental clearances. Vimlendu Jha, I'll give you the last comment. Since you were very angry and upset yesterday, I want to ask you whether you see this as a wake-up call, whether you see this as that watershed moment where we pause and say, okay, let's take a closer look at how we are building infrastructure, especially in mountainous regions like Uttarakhand. Do you see that happen? Because the Char Dham project, you and I know this, is a prestige project for the Modi government.
Absolutely. So just because it's a pet project and a prestige project and therefore an ego project for the Prime Minister or his government, that does not mean we short circuit the environmental norms of the country. Follow the norms of the country and be more mindful about the geology and the ecology of the place. That's what is very, very important. And I also want to tell you that we as a country and our government has a very skewed understanding of disaster management. Disaster management is not about post-disaster. Disaster management ideally is 80% pre-disaster and 20% post-disaster. This entire, running around the country looking for machine and looking for rat hole miners and everything else is because we did not have a plan in place. And by the way, I should also tell you, having understood environmental impact assessment and its norms, ideally, if there was an environmental impact assessment conducted on this project, environmental impact assessment also mandates a disaster plan. The fact that there was no EIA or there was a shortcut EIA that was done, there was no disaster management plan as well. Ideally, we need to understand that this is not the first tunnel that has collapsed. There are almost 66 similar projects that's actually underway in Uttarakhand. When we talk about the Char Dham rail project, the road project, the hydroelectric power plants, the kind of muck that is being dumped, we have seen enough of disasters already starting 2013 to now. I'm not even talking about Chamoli, Gopeshwar, earthquakes of Uttarkashi. I'm just talking about weather-related events, weather-triggered, disasters. Because of these so-called development activities, these disasters went several-fold. The reason why Kedarnath tragedy became such a huge tragedy is because of the amount of muck that was actually dumped in Bhagirathi and other tributaries. Similarly, this project, by the way, we are not even talking about it today, but you won't believe more than several million tons of muck is actually dumped in Yamuna and Ganga, but because of this project, because there's no disposal of all the excavation muck from these projects. So, not following environmental norms. Do we want Himalayas to be known for its fancy road and infrastructure, or do we want Himalayas to be known for its ecology? Because the impact of that is on the entire climate and change of India and the region, and not just about our mobility. How fast can we move from one place to another?
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the thing. Building a road in the Himalayas is not like building a road in Delhi or Bombay. We all need to understand that. And people who build roads completely understand that. What I'm saying, I'm not saying don't build. All I'm saying is pause and see how you are building. We'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. Vimlendu Jha, good to have you on the show. Naveen Bhatnagar, thank you very much. Professor Rajiv Sinha, thank you very much. And Sandeep Chachra, thank you very much. With that, I'm slipping into a very quick break on the show. Up next, there's lots more coming up. Do stay with us.